half of all proceeds from this video will be going to Missing Persons UK, so please stay to the end to find out how you can help. On the 27th of November in 2017, a 22-year-old woman was heading home after spending the week at her boyfriend's house when she mysteriously disappeared. After being reported missing, police began their search for the young woman, and over a month later, they received a strange call from her phone number. The call was later traced, but unfortunately this didn't lead to any further evidence and the case eventually went cold. That was until 5 years later, when her severely decomposed body was finally discovered and identified through dental records. However, to this day, her cause of death remains a mystery, with no suspects being investigated at this time. So, was this a simple case of a woman struggling with her mental health? Or was there perhaps more to the story? This is the suspicious case of Cheyann Klus. Cheyann Klus was born on the 19th of December in 1994 in the state of Illinois, where she grew up surrounded by friends and family. Not much is known about her younger years, but as she grew up, she started to find herself in trouble, with friends later claiming she had a substance abuse problem from a young age. It wasn't uncommon for Cheyann to disappear from time to time, but with her mother eventually falling ill and passing away after a lengthy battle with cancer in 2016, everybody noticed an unpredictable change in her behaviour. She was starting to engage in more destructive behaviour which worried her family and friends, but unfortunately there was little they could do. Things only worsened over time, with Cheyann starting to develop depression, as she would sink deeper into substance abuse as a means of self-medication. But despite friends and family constantly offering their help, Cheyann would continue to partake in these destructive activities, eventually leading to her sudden disappearance towards the end of 2017. On the 27th of November in 2017, Cheyann left her home to spend some time in Chicago with her boyfriend, Brian Bridle. At the time, Cheyann lived alone with her father, and as she was walking out the door, she mentioned to him that she would be back on December 1st. She only took her laptop and a few pieces of clothing, so it appeared that she didn't have plans to stay any longer than promised. Cheyann then got into an Uber which was ordered by Brian and was taken over to his house, where he had planned an all-day, all-night private party for just the two of them. She was apparently acting normally all night, but after the party, the next morning, her 38-year-old boyfriend woke up to see that the young woman was nowhere to be found. Little else is known about what occurred at the party specifically, but it is assumed that there was a lot of alcohol and substance abuse. Days went by with minimal contact from Cheyann up until November 30th, when she sent several urgent messages to her friend Chad Chanapai, begging to be picked up. The texts did not explain why she was so desperate, but when Chad finally read the messages and responded around 20 minutes later, she didn't reply or answer any of his calls. However, there was one last hope, as Cheyann had promised her father that she would be home the next day on December 1st. But after she failed to show up, her father was left incredibly concerned. It wasn't uncommon for the young woman to stay out for long periods of time, but she would always make sure to update her father, especially after her mother had recently passed away. So, after he attempted to get in touch with his daughter multiple times throughout the day with no luck, he eventually decided to call the police to file a missing persons report, fearing his daughter might be in danger. On the 2nd of December, the investigation officially began, with the Chicago police heading straight over to Brian Briddle's residence, as he was the last person to see her. After arriving, Brian seemed hesitant to let the police inside. However, this could have been due to the fact he likely had illegal substances in the house at the time. But after the initial hesitation, he eventually allowed the police to enter his home and search the residence for any sign of Cheyann or something that may have helped with the investigation. However, there was little evidence that pointed the Chicago police in any particular direction, and they eventually had to conclude their search to inspect other potential leads. The next stop was Chad Chanapai, who was the last person to hear from Cheyann over text message. He was incredibly helpful and appeared to be extremely concerned for his friend. One of her desperate text messages read, "Chad, please answer the phone. Why aren't you answering the phone? Please come and get me." which of course concerned the Chicago PD, as for the first time there was serious evidence that something terrible may have happened to Cheyann. Well, after sharing all of the text messages, the police were satisfied with Chad's cooperation and were able to confidently remove him as a potential suspect. And so with this, they decided to set their sights on Brian once again. According to the 38-year-old man, Cheyann had left his house in the early hours of December 28th, but rather than trying to find out where she went, instead he decided to go back to sleep, where he slept for a total of 18 hours before finally attempting to get in contact with Cheyann to find out where she was. The Chicago police were initially unsatisfied as his whereabouts couldn't be corroborated by anyone, so they asked if they could inspect his personal cell phone and laptop to see if they could perhaps prove his alibi. Well, to their surprise, a thorough inspection came up empty, and it showed that Brian had in fact not been using his cell phone or laptop during the hours of which he claimed to be sleeping. So with this new update, the authorities were satisfied that Brian was not involved in Cheyann's disappearance, and they continued to search for new leads. Unfortunately, the investigation went relatively cold for the next few days, with police failing to find any new leads whatsoever. But then, in a shocking twist that nobody saw coming, a mysterious phone call was made to the Chicago Police Department. On the 11th of December, an unassuming police officer was covering for a colleague's shift as a 911 dispatcher when a quick call came in that he didn't have time to answer. Concerned, he investigated the call, and after checking the number, he realized it was a match to Cheyann's very own phone, and contacted the local DuPage County Sheriff's Department to further investigate the call. Detective Jeff Leonard was put on the case, but initially he had no idea who had made the call. Everybody hoped that it was Cheyann. However, the police were not naive and knew it could be possible that somebody was sending the police on a wild goose chase. The call to 911 was then traced, and there were pings on a cell phone tower at the Mallard Lake Forest Preserve in DuPage County, 20 miles from Brian Brittle's house and 18 miles from Cheyann's home. Police officers and canine units were sent to the 86-acre preserve to scour the area for any evidence of Cheyann, and after several days, the searchers turned up a few possible pieces of potential evidence. Detective Jeff Leonard was quoted as saying, "Some things were found that were collected as possible evidence, but we are unable at this time to link it to anybody." But with no sign of Cheyann or her cell phone, her family and friends were becoming increasingly frustrated as the weeks passed. But despite the bleak situation, Detective Leonard tried to keep everyone's hopes alive. "We're still treating this as a missing persons case, and until she is found deceased, then I'm considering her to be alive." The leader of the search party, Gia Hoffman, was particularly driven to find some answers. There's different areas of water, different hills, there's a lot of trails that go around that we haven't checked yet. She then organised another volunteer army to scour the 86 acres of forest once again, and they went through the area inch by inch, meticulously searching behind every branch. Cheyann's aunt, Sylvia, even joined in as she had promised her late sister that she would take care of Cheyann once she passed, so hopes were high at that time. But to add another layer of disappointment to this already frustrating case, once again, they came up empty. It was as if every lead they followed led to a dead end, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to stay positive. With emotions running high, Gia Hoffman had some rather controversial words to say about the case, where she heavily implied that Brian Biddle knew a lot more than he was giving off, later saying, "It's time for Biddle to get a wake-up call and answer the questions about what he knows. He's not reaching out to anybody, he's not responding to anybody, and it leaves a big gap with one big question. She was last with you. How did you not know that for 18 hours something was wrong?" But despite these suspicions, the DuPage County Sheriffs agreed with the Chicago police, claiming that Brian was nothing more than a valuable witness with no affiliation to Cheyann's disappearance. They were later quoted as saying, "Brian is cooperating with us. He gave us all the information that we're looking for. He let us search his home, he let us search his personal devices, his phones, his computer, and everything else like that." But after weeks of no further updates to the case, Suddenly, Brian Biddle was arrested and booked on charges of possession of a firearm and narcotics. However, these charges were completely unrelated to the disappearance of Cheyann Klus, and police were back to square one, yet again. Although it was certainly noteworthy, as it showed Brian in a darker light, as if he could break the law by carrying an illegal firearm that was more than capable of taking someone's life. What else was he capable of? This, alongside his nefarious background of substance abuse, painted Brian Biddle in a very suspicious light. However, with no evidence to speak of, he could not be taken seriously as a potential suspect. The next 5 years were torturous for Cheyann's family, as they could do nothing but hope and pray she would be found alive. But as each anniversary passed, the likelihood of her safe return was extremely low. A few friends held out hope, but Gia Hoffman, the leader of the search party, was not convinced. She strongly believed that Cheyann was gone, and that it was only a matter of time before her body turned up. And sadly, this assumption would become heartbreakingly true, when police would soon discover the severely decomposed remains of Cheyann Klus. On the 17th of January in 2023, the Cook County Sheriff's Department was called to a scene to investigate possible human remains that were found by a concerned citizen. The initial assumption was that they were likely from a deceased animal given the severe decomposition, but after arriving on the scene, the on-duty sheriff was immediately shocked to find distinct human bones amongst the remains. It is currently unknown where this scene took place, but with Cook County being home to the city of Chicago, it is more than likely that Cheyann was found not too far away from where she was last seen 5 years prior. In a statement made by the Cook County Sheriff's Office, they worked alongside the DuPage County Sheriff's Office as well as the FBI to confirm Cheyann Klus's identity through dental records. However, once again, it is unknown how she passed or even how long ago her death had taken place. At the time of recording, it has been 7 months since Cheyann's body was found. However, there is still yet to be any updates on the cause of death. However, according to the Cook County Sheriff's Department, they are continuing to work with the Chicago police to investigate the circumstances of her death, but at the very least, they were grateful to help bring some measure of closure to the Klus family. So, as of right now, this case is still unsolved, with many questions still remaining around how Cheyann died, and whether or not foul play was involved. Now, despite this case seeming very suspicious in nature, the police are still yet to officially claim that Cheyann was the victim of a murder. In fact, with no suspects in sight, the likely scenario based on the available evidence would seem to point in the direction of self-infliction. The remains found were so decomposed that there was no way of telling how she had died. The assumption was that she likely passed away shortly after going missing, so after 5 years, there was very little an autopsy would be able to uncover. Were there substances in her system at the time? Could she have suffered from blunt force trauma by a potential perpetrator? Or could she have simply been the victim of the elements? She went missing during the winter period, so this is certainly possible. Now, on this channel, I have covered many cases where the potential cause of death was associated with substance abuse and poor weather conditions. However, in the case of Cheyann Klus, given her strange text messages to her friend the night she went missing, it would seem there was certainly something nefarious going on at the time. So could Cheyann have been the victim of a murder? Well, her Aunt Sylvia certainly thinks so, with her suspicions being heavily placed on Brian Biddle, Cheyann's 38-year-old boyfriend at the time. First of all, he was 16 years her senior, which already raises many red flags, but his behaviour also seemed to paint him in a darker light. He was a substance abuser, he had several run-ins with the law, including right around the time Cheyann went missing, and he was known by many to be a nefarious character. People close to Cheyann did not like Brian and felt he was a bad influence. So when she initially went missing, it was a very easy step to blame Brian for the shock disappearance. However, every police department that interviewed him said he was not involved and that he was nothing but cooperative. Now, whether or not Brian Biddle has any connections with the police department is unknown. However, given his rap sheet, I would assume there is no conspiracy here. Nevertheless, it wouldn't be the first time a cooperative witness was eventually convicted of the crime, so only time will tell if Brian is in fact innocent. His laptop and cell phone corroborated his alibi, however it's still very possible he could have been involved in the disappearance. Maybe Cheyann suffered an overdose on the substances Brian had been sharing with her, and rather than calling for an ambulance, he simply took off and hid her body somewhere in Cook County. But let's say Brian is in fact innocent here, and despite his dark past, it's merely a coincidence that he was the last person to see Cheyann. Who else could have been to blame? Another popular theory is that Cheyann's friend, Chad Chanapai, could be the culprit. Again, he was incredibly cooperative with the police, but this doesn't necessarily rule him out as a suspect. In fact, some criminals prefer to stay close to the case and provide useful help to try and remove suspicion from themselves. But is there really any weight to this theory? Well, there is certainly not a lot of evidence pointing in this direction. However, what if Chad had faked the text messages pretending to be Cheyann? There is no mention of Cheyann's phone ever being found, so if she had caused her own death, surely her phone would be in the surrounding area near her body. Maybe Chad disposed of it after making that strange 911 call a few weeks after Cheyann disappeared. This is purely speculation, but given that he was the last person to officially speak to her, I feel you have to remain somewhat skeptical. You could argue with Chad being a close friend of Cheyann's, he may have perhaps been jealous of her relationship with Brian, and after getting into a heated argument, he accidentally took her life and had no choice but to dispose of the body afterwards and cover his tracks. But until new evidence comes to light, this will remain nothing more than a theory. So given the evidence that is available, with both Brian and Chad being cleared as suspects, what is the most likely theory here? Perhaps she was the victim of a drifter, who just happened to be passing by when he saw a vulnerable young woman walking down the street. Maybe Cheyann could sense she was being followed, and that's why she was texting Chad so incessantly to pick her up. But once Chad saw the messages and tried to call her back, it was already too late. Given that there were several unsolved murders in the area of Chicago at the time, plus Chicago being the third most populous city in the entire country behind New York and LA, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say she fell victim to a random murderer on the street. Again, there is no hard evidence to back up this theory, but how else do you explain the strange text messages, the mysterious call to 911 2 weeks later, and then her body being discovered with no cell phone? Given these circumstances, it would certainly seem something nefarious took place during that time period. But until the police release more evidence, we will just have to wait and see. It's possible that as this is still technically an active case, the police do not want to reveal any information that may tip off a potential suspect, so for now I'm happy for the evidence to stay under wraps. But what if the reason there is no further updates from the police is because they have already uncovered the truth? What if Cheyann wasn't a victim and actually caused the tragic death herself? Her friends and family did mention that she was depressed at the time of her disappearance due to the recent passing of her mother. It's a theory that certainly can't be ruled out, and given Cheyann's heavy substance abuse at the time, there is good reason to believe her depression may have been enhanced, mixed with a flurry of poor decision-making, eventually leading to her tragic end. If this is in fact the case, perhaps there are still a few stones that need to be turned over by the police before this hypothesis can be officially confirmed. But until that day, we will just have to be patient and hope the Klus family get the answers they deserve once and for all. Now, before I end the video, as a mark of respect to Cheyann's family, I wanted to read a message written by her sister Mariah after they first discovered her body. Dear friends and family, on behalf of the Klus family, we would like to extend our appreciation to the DuPage and Cook County Sheriff's Departments, as well as the other agencies involved in the search for Cheyann. We have been looking for Cheyann and information related to her disappearance since she went missing over 5 years ago. While it was not the news we were hoping for, we have received confirmation from law enforcement that Cheyann's remains were found. As her immediate family, fathers, sisters, brothers, nephews, in mourning, We ask for privacy as we grieve the unbearable loss of a daughter, sister, aunt, and human being. We plan to hold a private memorial service for Cheyann amongst us, but we hope that everyone can find solace in knowing that she has been found and respectfully laid to rest. Please be mindful of the sensitive nature of these circumstances and the effects this can have for our family and other families who are dealing with missing loved ones. If you are searching for answers, please go to the source and reach out to law enforcement who can provide you factual information. Please do not rely on the news, social media, podcasts, commenters and/or groups, since they often provide their opinions for a reaction. If you are wondering how you can be involved or would like to proactively help, please donate your resources to a government law enforcement agency that focuses on missing persons and helps reunite loved ones with their families. Thank you for understanding. So at this point, I would also like to mention that I will be personally donating half of all the proceeds from this video to Missing Persons UK, which is a UK charity that provides specialist support to people who are missing, as well as their families who are often left behind. Their free confidential helpline is available in the description of this video, so if you would like to show any further support, links can be found below. And with that, I think I'll leave this video here, but as always, I hope you found the story interesting, and if you have any more theories of your own surrounding this case, please feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and check out our previous true crime documentary on screen now, where we cover the equally suspicious case of Elizabeth Hock.